So here you are, strolling through London, snapping a selfie with Big Ben like any self-respecting tourist. But just as you're about to perfect your angle, bam, there's a massive crowd surrounding you. Wait, what's going on? Are they filming the next season of T? N. This rally, dubbed Unite the Kingdom, was organized by Tommy Robinson, and if you've heard of him, you know it's going to be a spectacle. But instead of a peaceful gathering to discuss how great the Queen is, this was more like a ticking time bomb with 110,000 people ready to explode at any second. Welcome to the largest far-right movement in the UK's modern history, because who doesn't love a good pee? Let's paint the picture. The weather is perfect, London's skyline is as iconic as ever, and people are waving flags, holding signs, and chanting like they're at the UK's version of Coachella. But here's the kicker. This isn't the happy, peace-loving Kumbaya crowd. Oh no. Things escalate quickly, and suddenly you're watching bottles fly, fireworks bursting through the air, and fireworks being thrown at cops. You know, just the usual day in London. I'm not exaggerating. Police officers were getting pummeled, with a shocking 26 officers injured. 4 of them were taken to the hospital. Think broken teeth, concussions, and some serious injuries. Meanwhile, the protesters, in their pure rage, were pushing through police lines like a rugby team trying to score. So much for British politeness, right? But just when you thought it couldn't get more absurd, here comes Elon Musk, casually appearing on a giant screen to speak to the crowd. As if the situation wasn't already out of control, Musk decides to add some fuel to the fire by criticizing the state of the UK, even going as far as calling for the dissolution of Parliament. I mean, what could go wrong? The crowd? They loved it. Musk, the billionaire, was now their unofficial mascot, their virtual cheerleader. Meanwhile, the UK government, represented by Prime Minister Keir Starmer, had to sit back and watch as things spun further out of control. Starmer's response was, of course, to condemn the protesters and call out the far right for hijacking what should have been a peaceful movement. And it wasn't just the protesters who were causing a stir. The political response was just as dramatic. Members of parliament from all sides of the spectrum started firing shots across the bow, condemning the violence, while also grappling with their own inability to find common ground on what the UK was really facing. Would these far-right movements die down on their own? Or was this just the beginning of a new wave of political unrest? As all of this was unfolding in the heart of London, let's not forget that the rest of Europe wasn't exactly living in a calm, peaceful bubble either. While the UK was busy battling it out in the streets, France wasn't exactly sitting this one out. In September 2025, France's political landscape was crumbling faster than a stale baguette. Prime Minister François Bayrou, who had been at the helm for a while, suddenly found himself in a very awkward position when he failed to survive a no-confidence vote. Talk about a political meltdown. So, naturally, Bayrou did what any self-respecting leader would do in his position. He stepped down. But this wasn't just a small hiccup in French politics. No, it was a full-blown crisis. People started whispering about President Macron's potential resignation. Would he follow in Bayrou's footsteps? Was it time for him to call it quits? Spoiler alert, Macron wasn't having any of it. Instead of resigning, Macron decided to play the role of the political superhero, vowing to stick around until 2027, no matter how rocky the road ahead might be. He even announced plans to appoint a new prime minister to help steer the ship through these turbulent waters. I mean, talk about confidence in the middle of a storm, right? But the political soap opera in France didn't end there. You see, France had its own set of problems. The country was deep in an economic recession, with no clear exit strategy in sight. Inflation was soaring, public services were stretched thin, and protests were flaring up across the nation. People were starting to lose patience, especially when they looked at their empty wallets and the rising prices for just about everything. This is where the far right stepped into the scene, again. Much like in the UK, they began blaming immigrants for all of the country's economic woes. According to them, the rise in immigration was flooding the job market, stretching public resources too thin, and basically destroying the French identity. So naturally, instead of pointing the finger at the actual economic problems, they decided to stoke the flames of fear and resentment. And if that wasn't enough, Europe as a whole was feeling like one big pressure cooker. It wasn't just France and the UK that were in turmoil. Everywhere you looked, the mood was the same: frustration, anger, and a collective sense that the political system was failing its people. Germany, long seen as Europe's economic powerhouse, was facing its own challenges. With a stagnant economy, inflation on the rise, and the weight of climate change policies pushing up the cost of living, the German public had reached its breaking point. But instead of coming together to find solutions, the country seemed to be spiraling into more division. The far right, once a fringe group, was now gaining traction, fueled by economic hardship and the desire for someone to blame. And in Poland? Well, the situation was just as messy. Anti-immigrant protests were spreading like wildfire, as people in Poland blamed newcomers for taking their jobs and increasing the sense of insecurity. The political climate in Poland became so tense that even the most neutral of observers could sense that something was about to snap. Across the continent, the far right was gaining ground, blaming the same enemies: immigrants, the government, the elites. And while they might have been different in name and style, these far-right movements shared a common enemy: democracy itself. Their goal wasn't to fix the system, it was to tear it down. Now, all of this unrest is rooted in one simple thing: economics. And when we look at the economic situation in Europe, it's easy to see why things are so volatile. Since the energy crisis of 2022, Europe has been scrambling to find new sources of energy after the deal with Russia expired. Gas prices are skyrocketing, inflation is out of control, and people are feeling the pinch. This has created the perfect storm for far-right groups to capitalize on the frustrations of the average citizen. As people struggle to make ends meet, they're turning to these movements for answers, even if those answers are based on hate and division. So, here we are, Europe in 2025. It's like a pressure cooker with the lid barely holding on. The combination of rising energy costs, economic stagnation, and political instability has made the continent a hotbed of frustration. Every day feels like it could be the day the whole thing blows up. But what's really behind this widespread unrest? Let's talk about energy. No, it's not just the heating bills, although that's certainly a big part of it. In 2025, Europe's energy crisis is hitting people hard, and not just in their wallets. The reality? Europe is scrambling to replace Russian gas supplies after a major energy deal expired back in 2024. With no new agreements in place, countries across the continent are fighting tooth and nail for energy resources. And guess what? Prices are soaring. Now imagine this. It's winter. Your heating bill doubles, your grocery store runs out of affordable food, and your car's gas tank feels like it's draining your savings. This is the daily struggle for millions of Europeans. And the political response? Well, it's been less than stellar. Governments across the continent have tried to play the hero by implementing climate change policies, pushing green energy alternatives, and slapping tougher regulations on carbon emissions. But there's one little problem. These policies come with higher costs: higher fuel prices, higher electricity bills, stricter regulations on businesses. All of that means more pain for the average European. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The far right, sensing an opportunity, has swooped in. The economic crisis has provided the perfect breeding ground for nationalist rhetoric and blame. According to these groups, the problem isn't energy prices, it's immigration. They've managed to convince people that immigrants are the root cause of Europe's economic struggles. They're taking our jobs, crowding our hospitals, and draining our resources, they cry. So, while Europe's energy crisis keeps people up at night, the far right is busy redirecting all that anxiety into anger at the other. And people, desperate for answers, are listening. It's the classic strategy: find a scapegoat, stoke fear, and rally support. It's been working like a charm. But it's not just the UK and France that are dealing with these far-right movements. The far right is gaining ground across all of Europe. In Hungary, Viktor Orban has turned into a poster child for authoritarianism, doubling down on anti-immigrant rhetoric and pushing policies that undermine democratic institutions. In Italy, Matteo Salvini and his Lega party are stirring up nationalistic fervor, claiming that they are the true protectors of Italian identity. And let's not forget about the rise of the far right in Eastern Europe. where politicians like Poland's Jarosław Kaczynski are stirring up hate against immigrants and minorities, creating an atmosphere of tension and division. These groups are using the same playbook everywhere. Blame the elite, blame immigrants, blame the EU, and divide the population. The far right doesn't have solutions to the real problems. They just know how to manipulate the frustrations of ordinary people. And as the political climate in Europe grows more volatile, they're growing more powerful. So, what does this mean for the future of Europe? Well, let's just say it's looking pretty bleak. With populist leaders like Orban and Kaczynski gaining ground and economic issues worsening, the future of the EU is more uncertain than ever. Now, let's zoom out a bit and take a look at the bigger picture. How does all this unrest fit into the broader context of the European Union? Well, let's just say that the EU is in serious trouble. The days of being the shining beacon of democracy and unity seem like a distant memory. Instead, the EU is like a house of cards. One push, and it could all come crashing down. For starters, the EU is dealing with a major crisis of legitimacy. With populist far-right leaders gaining ground, the EU's ability to enforce policies and maintain unity is being called into question. Countries like Hungary and Poland are openly defying EU rules, and there's little the EU can do about it. The once united front of European cooperation is now fractured, with each country looking out for its own interests rather than the collective good. And then there's the issue of the EU's economic strategy. The energy crisis, the inflation, and the ongoing economic struggles have left the EU scrambling for answers. But instead of coming together to find a solution, the EU is divided. Some member states are pushing for more green energy investments, while others are pushing back, fearing that it will cost too much. And let's not forget the Brexit aftermath, which still looms over the EU like an unwanted guest. So, what's the solution? Well, if the EU can't find a way to pull itself together, we could be looking at a Europe that's politically fractured and economically crippled. And if that happens, you can bet that the far right will be ready to capitalize on the chaos, rallying even more support from the disillusioned masses. At the end of the day, Europe in 2025 is a continent on the brink. Economic hardships, political instability, and the rise of the far right are creating a perfect storm. And while the EU and its leaders scramble for answers, it's clear that Europe is at a crossroads. The energy crisis isn't just about heating bills and gas prices. It's a symptom of a much deeper issue. The failure of European leadership to address the root causes of discontent is only making things worse. As a result, people are turning to extreme solutions, and the far right is more than happy to provide them. So, where does this leave us? Well, for now, it's anyone's guess. But one thing's for sure, Europe is going to have to make some serious decisions about its future. Will it remain united, or will it fall apart under the pressure of rising nationalism, economic hardship, and political dysfunction? And as for the rest of the world? Well, it's not exactly a time to be smug. Europe's problems could easily spill over, affecting global markets, migration patterns, and even international diplomacy. For now, we can only wait and see what happens next. But trust me, the drama is far from over.